Welcome back, everyone. Episode 5 of Knowledge Unbound. We are graciously brought to you by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, Open STEM Education, generously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. As always, I am here to greet my favorite producer because he's my only producer, Mr. Segev Amasai.
There can only be one.
Segev, you seem kind of tired today. Are you okay?
I'm doing fine. You know, around that time of the semester, finals week is coming up and all, but I'm still very excited to hear about the guest that you bring onto this show. And, you know, I was looking through this episode and it turns out that there's not just one thing that's being unbound, but two.
Tell me
You know, we have knowledge unbound, but then we also have college unbound. I found that to be a bit of a surprise. So tell us about it.
Segev is making a play on words that today's guest is the president of College Unbound, a very just unique and wonderful institution in Providence, Rhode Island. And they're nationwide, but physically in Providence, Rhode Island. And President Adam Bush and I spent some time just talking about his journey to that and the sort of big life questions that College Bound is trying to answer. And as always, this journey, these conversations took us down different paths, different things, and really hope that you learn from it in the same way that Segev was inspired by it. So welcome to episode 5. I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much for having me. And first, I really want to start by saying how thrilled I am to be here with you and just sitting together in the offices of FIU and having a chance to be in brainstorm space together. Like, there's so much that I think is swirling around these issues, and you and I both think about what it means to institutionalize things,
Right.
what it means to challenge institutionalization. Sitting here with you as a thought partner and friend means a lot. It's an important space to have.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. All right. So your question was, it was like a why do I do the work I do?
Well, let's get, before we get to the why, I want to hear your journey to College Unbound, and feel free to start wherever you need to, including if it's I was 5 years old when because that journey might say a lot more about your why, so that by the time you actually get to directly addressing your why, it'll be very apparent from your journey.
All right, I'll give you a few disjointed incidents that will lead up to maybe some of that why. Your 5-year-old thing, I'll go to 6. I was 6 when my younger sister was born, and my grandfather, my mom's dad, had a stroke while I was sleeping over at their house. And
did you physically witness it?
I awoke with the ambulance showing up.
Okay.
And so it was it's like a moment in my life I remember very clearly. I also remember very clearly going to the hospital to visit with my sister in a stroller for weeks after that. And I remember very clearly for years after that doing speech therapy with my grandfather as he taught himself to walk and talk again. At the same time as my younger sister learning to walk and talk. And I think for me, that's what I identify as like a grounding pedagogical moment, or a thing that helped me think about where teaching and learning happens, the importance of it always being multi-generational, and filled deeply with love.
Right.
I was a goofy kid, always interested in trying things differently. So I remember like talking my Spanish teacher into letting me, instead of sitting in class, selling churros in the public park during baseball and softball games for the school. I remember as an undergrad being interested in being on like curriculum committees and the policies that led to change. And I also, as an undergrad, was like this. I was a young student at the start of the Center for Jazz Studies at Columbia University. And So I was the kid who was setting up chairs while events were happening, and found the people I wanted to learn from and spend time with about the scholarship they were doing, but also what it meant to build an entity to study this thing differently. It wasn't a musicology department. It was how to lift up, understand, honor jazz musicians as knowledge makers, as collaborators, as folks with a vision of how the world could and should be, and how jazz as a lens to look at American studies and American culture could present a path to be in that world differently. And so the work I started to do as a jazz historian in the next years was really because I wanted to be peers in that space. I wanted to present scholarship in that space.
Right.
So I started a multi-year project. It was my grandfather's old Cadillac. I got in Los Angeles, and I hit the road for a few years, interviewing musicians on the origins of black music in their high schools and what it meant to learn improvisation as a young kid, and the teachers that carved out the space for that instruction.
Did all of them learn that improvisation in a school necessarily?
No, very much not.
Okay.
But it was teachers insisting that schools change to make sure that there was black music taught in those spaces.
Okay.
That was an
Okay.
important pivot moment
Okay.
in segregated black public high schools around the country.
Okay.
In Birmingham in 1917, though, I mean, students went on strike insisting that their music program have instruments. So they were fighting for a different type of music to be
Right.
present. Teachers at the time were deeply creative and smart, making sure that that was felt in the schools.
Right.
That what was happening in the classrooms was reflecting the work and the music making that was happening anywhere on stoops and on sidewalks and
Right.
in rec rooms and on bandstands.
So given the time period, given
Yeah.
the time point you're talking about, do you know if there was a similar curriculum in white schools, or if any of this was being touched at all?
No, very
Okay.
much not.
Okay. So there's some
This was
kind
black
of cultural
music.
relevant pedagogy before it became a term. Basically.
Exactly. Black music and black schools
Yeah.
because black students and teachers insisted on it.
Right.
And so, I think I started doing that work as an academic exercise. It very quickly became a political project. And the thing that I couldn't just write about it as a notion without also doing that work in real time. And so the work I began to do in graduate school and that sustained me through graduate school was about culturally relevant high school education, was writing about culturally relevant high school education. It was about political organizing, seeing and studying students organize in their schools, how to create institutions like
Tell
that.
me a little bit more about that, because I feel like that right there is the tethering that maybe a lot of people who are supportive of activism, who are supportive of the kind of politics that would give us equity, that would give us the tools and the environment we need in schools. But you just used the phrase, you quickly realize it was also a political project, right? Walk us through a little bit what you mean by that. How did that realization come to be? And what did you do with it?
So I remember, I was interviewing not just present day musicians who learned music in those classrooms. I was interviewing the first black postman of Oklahoma City
Okay.
and the first black mayor of Birmingham,
Okay.
and folks who were political actors, whether or not they were identified as organizers or
Got it.
politicians,
Right.
that saw
And so we have to sort of broaden what we think of when we think of politics.
I think
right?
of politics,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also the importance of improvisation. I think it forced me to see it that you weren't just learning improvisation to be a musician. You were learning improvisation as a way of being in the world. And that is political work. And I began to see and understand improvisation not just as a research subject, but the more and more I got involved in higher education, it became the way I taught and designed classes in deep co-creation and collaboration with
Yeah.
students.
Okay.
And then as I got more and more involved in higher ed, it became the institutional ethic I was after.
Okay.
It wasn't just the way I wanted to teach, it was the way I
Yeah.
wanted our institutions to exist
Right.
and be able to change.
So, given this central role that this construct of improvisation, this theme of improvisation, has played in so many aspects of your journey, I feel you owe it to the audience to explain in your words, right, what you mean when I'm not even really asking for a definition per se, but just the meaning. What should somebody think of when you are using this term in the context you are using this term?
I would say improvisation has an ethic of active listening and of co-creation and responsiveness. And you can see that play out on a bandstand with musicians. You can see that play out in rehearsal and practice. You can see that play out on a sports pitch or in how we're talking together.
Right.
There's lots of ways that the tools and ethics of improvisation appear in parts of life that aren't just music co-creation. And so I became really interested in how to think about that in different ways that I wanted to work in the world.
Okay. So is some of that active listening, and here's the context for this question. I was trained as a classical pianist for 10 years. I'm terrible now because I stopped when I was 16 or something.
Have you insisted your kids play piano growing up?
Insisted is a strong word. I'm not trying to have DCF come to my house, but I do encourage. I do encourage them. I do encourage them. They like it, but it's it's how much hours in the day and how much activities you do. But they actually do like it, and I do think I guess maybe more hopeful that they will get into it in a more serious way soon. But I was trained like in the Mozart, Beethoven kind of world, and I grew up in Trinidad. We played steel pan music, but we played mostly gospel, pop, classical, and we started to do a little bit of jazz. And I quickly realized I wasn't very good at that, right? And I remember the band leader. So this is Jazz on Pan. I remember the band leader had said, "Brian, you need to listen to your brain. You need to listen to the stories being told in your head." And I couldn't, I was 9, right? So that's the other context. But as I'm hearing you talking about active listening, I'm wondering if some of the listening is changes, morphing, all of the things that are happening in you that's responding to the environment around you that you also need to be in commune with, in addition to your colleagues.
Yeah. I'm just picturing 9-year-old me right now.
Please do.
But, the work I was doing, like I was spending a lot of time with jazz musicians. I still do whenever I can. The methodology I was doing was oral history.
Okay.
And that also is grounded in principles of active listening. It wasn't interviews that I was conducting. It was oral history sessions of spending time with someone in their life, and the shared authority of that interview not being something I was taking the recording of and driving away, but how we could look at that transcript together, edit it together, go back and have another conversation, go through the attic together and talk through artifacts and find ways that stories became alive in the present moment in kind of a collaborative sharing.
Okay.
And so I'd see that with music making. I see that with storytelling.
Right.
I think part of your question is, how does it also affect you, me?
Yeah.
And it became sort of like grounding principles of how I wanted to live my life and do work too,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to digress this too much, but I'm thinking of, just for context for the audience, President Bush and I are at, actually, timeout. I just call you President Bush. Tell me you've been using that.
No, I do not ask folks to call me President or President Bush. In fact,
You're not even tempted a little bit?
My phone message, when I first got my first cell phone 25 years ago, I made sure that I would like say my name and at the end I would say no relation. So I wanted to like establish I was not that President Bush. I was not trying to.
That's pretty funny.
Values, yeah.
But I wanted to tell people that Adam and I are at the AACNU, so American Association of Colleges and Universities annual conference, and we kind of snuck our way to do this recording. And I was just at a session by a good friend and colleague, Dr. Corbin Campbell from American University, and she was talking about how some professors do active learning. And she says particularly in, did she say particularly science classes? I can't remember what, but she said there are some professors who, to use her words, a one-trick pony, right? So they learn 3 things, and they do those same 3 things every class. So if you saw one class, you basically saw it all, right? And it was a really good way to put it, because one of my, not so much critiques of active learning, but maybe the way in which I operationalize it for how I teach is the activity, whatever we do, whether it's we kicking it, having a conversation, if I lecture, if we're doing a problem set, if we're going back and forth on a problem, it's informed by the conditions on the ground.
Yeah.
Like it's a constant conversation, right? It's never, I just have these 5 things and I have to get through it. It's, I have to see and everything, right? Like I'm looking at your eyes, your shoulders, your body language. So I guess hearing you give it this jazz framing is very, interesting, maybe lovely, right? Because as a lover of music. So I get the ethos of this, right? How this, practically speaking, how this then turn into the journey that you ended up on?
Yeah. How about I'm going to jump ahead just to be in conversation with you and the teaching that you talked about, and then I'll go back to a little bit more of the founding of the school, because I just finished. We're speaking in January, and I just finished a semester of teaching a class on reparations in higher education. And I love teaching. I want to make sure as I do more and more administrative work, I'm also grounding it in being in deep relationship with students and the classroom. And both as a reparative gesture for that class on reparations and in relationship with how lots of classes at College Unbound are taught. I didn't know what I was teaching until I knew who was in the room.
Right.
We designed a syllabus together. And if I'm truly honoring my students as colleagues and as folks who are bringing knowledge into that space and experience in that space, we needed to learn about one another so that we could share where we wanted and needed the class to go.
Yeah.
At College Unbound, there's a template where that happens in every class. I just taught a 16-week class, but normally they're 8 weeks, and in the first 2 weeks, every faculty member has a one-on-one meeting with every student to then design and tailor the next 6 weeks of the class, because every student is bringing projects and questions and issues that they are infusing that course with. The course is there as a lens to help someone enact the project that they're trying to do in the world. And so that class cannot be pre-designed.
Right.
It has to evolve.
Right.
Because of who's there and because we are different in relationship with one another.
Right.
So the whole school has to reflect that.
Later on, I'm going to ask you some questions about, professional development, faculty, like how, I know you, right? You're the president, but yeah, I mean, just the world we traffic in outside of College Unbound and what the culture of higher ed faculty tends to be, and some of the I like to say the higher ed isms that we've come to accept as in it, which you're currently disrupting. So I'm interested to hear about the personalities who have embraced that model. So anyway. So I'm excited out of this for you and I also to think about how to design deeper professional development structures within College Unbound, right?
And ways that College Unbound is not an isolated boutique institution,
right?
But one that has deep influence and impact across the landscape,
Right.
and has pathways for folks who maybe wouldn't see themselves as higher education professionals
Right.
to know that there's a space for them to step in to a community of teaching and learning.
Right. Okay.
So, if I'm going back to like early days of College Unbound, it was that as I got more and more involved in thinking about improvisation as a way of teaching, I was first at UC Santa Cruz and then at University of Southern California, and also working closely with a national consortium called Imagine America, Artists and Scholars in Public Life, and really thinking about practices of institutionalization and what type of institution I wanted to step into, could step into, and the limitations of the teaching I was doing in the schools I was connected to.
Right.
Through deep coincidence and friendship, Dennis Litke and I started teaching, working, going to brunch together, thinking about the work he had been doing for a lot of years at the Met High School and nationally with Big Picture Learning. That was one of the models that, I said, I started to look at present day actors for culturally relevant curriculum.
Right. Right.
And institutions that reflected that. And certainly Big Picture Learning had been doing that for years before I started. And so spending more and more time with that model, we started thinking about what did it mean to look at that through a lens of higher education. And so 15, 20 something years ago, I moved out to Rhode Island to start College Unbound.
Okay.
We weren't a college when we started.
Right.
We were an idea that started to build a consortium of colleges and universities who would embed within themselves higher education pathways, College Unbound pathways for folks that their institutions weren't already supporting.
Okay.
And that we would ensure that they're, through changing curriculum, through student services, through building different kind of living and learning centers, have students navigate those institutions. It was sort of like, when I look back on it, a funky version of the Posse program.
Okay.
Because we were trying to be in different control or in partnership on curricular stuff, on recruitment stuff, all the likes.
Did you send them to fancy New England colleges?
We never got the consortium figured out, but we ended up learning different things at each of the institutions we were working with. And before I jump into the consortium, the first month of the first group of College Unbound students, was a dozen students. We flew them all to Los Angeles. They stayed overnight in my parents' living room. And then we all got in a school bus that I drove. I had a bus driver's license at the time. And we spent a month driving back east across the country, stopping in every student's hometown.
Okay.
In Los Angeles, Sacramento, Seattle, Detroit, Camden, Hartford, Providence. And in each of those cities, each student was tasked in giving a tour of their hometown through themes that they cared about. We spent 10 days at the home of Grace Lee Boggs, an amazing organizer, activist, in Detroit, staying in her carriage house, thinking about, if we all care about these things, we're all about to move to Providence.
Right.
Where do we see models for multi-generational, multi-ethnic organizing for a better world? And sought to move to Providence into a living and learning community that we were trying to build together to do that work in Providence. And that was for our first group of students that were enrolled at Roger Williams University.
Right.
And I had a few cohorts.
So at that time, like a full-on college was not on your mind.
We were just a thing that felt like we could change colleges from within, through partners, through being an agitator.
Right.
It's really hard to be a partner with institutions when you're not actually a partner.
Yeah.
And
turns out.
Yeah, it turns out, by the way. I mean, you think about the thing, like, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're what's for dinner.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a little bit of like, we weren't anyone's budget priority.
Right.
So we were on, like, at that first university, we were on like our third president and fourth dean or whatever. As many
and I've heard somebody give that same phrase about seat at the table, you're on what's for dinner, but I told that person, you could have a seat at the table and be on the menu. Don't assume those things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
In fact, one could be done as a facade to fool you into thinking you're not on the menu. But yeah, I digress.
No, I mean, we were invited to the table
Yeah.
without. I mean, there was like things that like there was a language of partnership,
Right.
without actually shared ownership,
Right.
and in part that was meant to protect institutions.
Right.
I get that a little bit now on the other side.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's other ways of doing things.
Right.
And over the first 5 years of our existence, as we had these clunky partnerships, at the same time, adult learners started to seek us out, saying what you're doing as a personalized, culturally relevant curriculum connected to each student's life is what I want and need and what I'm not able to get at the institutions around me.
So when you say seek you out, like from where did they come? So like
Yeah.
did they see you like on a flyer? Did some people tell a friend?
Yeah.
Were they enrolled at particular institutions that you were at? Like where did that pool appear from?
2 examples. I'll give 3 examples. One is it was just 2 employees at the Met High School in Rhode Island.
Okay.
Saw the work we were doing with students that were living just across the street from the Met High School, and said, "Oh, I kind of want that, and I don't know where else to get that."
In Smith Hill.
We were on in South Providence.
Okay.
Another is I was in New Orleans and went to a community sing led by Carol Bebel, the founder of the Ashe Cultural Arts Center.
Okay.
The largest organization working in the work of African diaspora, led by folks of the African diaspora. And sharing about College Unbound, Carol called me 2 days later after a dream saying, I want that to work at Ashe, to support Ashe. And so very quickly, employees, allies, affiliates, and partners of Ashe formed a 10-person cohort that we were running in New Orleans.
Right, okay.
And then back in Rhode Island, it was like, I don't know how much we knew what we were doing, but we put out a Facebook flyer, said, have you started college and not finished? Come on Tuesday, there's going to be pizza. Let's figure it out. And 75 people showed up. And so there was this like built up, pent up energy for higher ed to be different.
Did it blow you away to see that number?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We thought 2 people were going to show up.
Right.
And
at this point, who's the we? Is it you and Dennis?
and a larger collective of friends, allies, other faculty, those students at the time.
Right.
Yeah, and we're still trying to design what we are at that point. But as we got clear that adult learners needed this, we got clear what it meant to provide a curricular model that was recognizing the learning that they were doing in daily life. Like it couldn't be, you have to come to campus 5 days a week. It couldn't be like, it had to recognize that they have full-time jobs and kids and everything. We knew we had to create a different kind of institution because the institutions we were partnering with weren't pivoting in those ways.
Right.
And so it set us on a path in 2015 to be recognized as the 13th post-secondary institution in Rhode Island.
Okay.
And that put us on a path to be accredited in the newest accredited college in New England in 2020. And that put us on a path to get approved through the state authorization reciprocity agreement to support students online nationwide. And so that's what we're doing now, embedded into public libraries and health clinics and conference rooms and people's homes and kitchen tables and school districts. That there's 8 to 10 to 12 people who gather in each of these spaces weekly, sharing stories and work that they're doing in the world in this, what we call the World and Workplace Lab.
Yeah.
And then we build curriculum on top of that help advance someone towards a bachelor's degree that's authentic to who they are.
So if you had to describe quickly in a couple sentences, because I feel we've talked about College Unbound, but I'm trying to think of somebody who's listening asking, well, actually, what I know it's a college, and I get it has a different model. How would you, as president, describe this to somebody who just walked up to you on the street and say, hey, I heard about your school. Can you tell me what it's about?
Sure. I have a little bit more than like an elevator ride,
Got
right?
it.
Like so I would say we're an accredited Bachelor of Arts program with one bachelor's degree in organizational leadership and change.
Okay.
A student pursuing that degree earns credit at College Unbound in 3 ways concurrently. In one, they're part of a weekly synchronous seminar every semester called the World and Workplace Lab. It's high school homeroom meets higher ed academic advising, meets your dissertation committee, meets town hall meeting, meets your kitchen table.
Right,
It's just
right.
like funky, sweet, caring space that feeds you, nurtures you, and asks of you to be a participant in sharing the work and learning you did that day and that week. And that's a 3-credit seminar every semester that you're enrolled in College Unbound.
Okay.
Layered on top of that are 8-week.
And just time out, you said you meet once a week. So do they meet for 3 hours? Okay.
Yep. It's a 3-hour seminar that by default is happening either Tuesday or Wednesday evening. By default has childcare and a hot dinner incorporated into it. There are other cohorts that, because of the student body or where they're meeting, or may do during the day or maybe in other places. And but that's sort of like the default template of it.
Okay.
And that group stays together throughout their while they're pursuing a bachelor's degree. Different than, let's say, high school, where you have high school homeroom, where everyone's at 9th grade, and the next year everyone goes to 10th grade, and next year everyone goes. At College Unbound, some folks enter in with 0 credits, some with 30, some with 90 credits.
Okay.
And so
Depending
some
on
folks,
what they bring.
depending on what they bring from other institutions, as well as, even if you come with 0 credits, we're gonna frame our college as a degree completion college, because we're very quickly jumping into, who are you? Tell us about things you've learned in life and experiences you've had, and let's help you document that so we can tease out learning outcomes, so you can document that as credit-bearing work.
Right.
And so even someone coming in with no past college certainly has deep learning experiences that could be accredited and honored and lifted up and put on someone's transcript.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing I love about it is that, without being explicit, a lot of times what we communicate in the current higher ed structure is that unless it's in the formal classroom with me with my PhD in front of you, it's not of value, right?
That's right. That's right.
And that's the underlying message. Like, no one's saying it out loud, but they're saying it out loud, right? Like, so, and so by doing so, could you maybe give an example then of how you disrupted that? Like, give an example of something that you know, through dialogue, right, you've been able to unearth this highly valuable thing that maybe even that individual hadn't before the conversation ascribed value to.
Yeah, we've. So I would first say, at how you described it, the assumptions of higher ed, absolutely. They say it only counts if it's in a classroom and if you're paying tuition for it. And what we said is, we got accreditation so that we can better honor learning that people are doing in daily life. How do we build an institution with that value, like, at its forefront? We say that everyone deserves a post-secondary degree, and we want to make sure that we are honoring that and living up to that. Embedded into everyone's first semester are, in addition to that lab, 2 different classes. One called Reframing Failure, that really came out of sort of like frustrations I had 15 years ago, seeing a lot of TED Talks from, like, social entrepreneurs saying, like, fail forward, and, like, I learned this thing and I messed up and the company closed, and so I went on to this next thing and I learned this and that one closed and then this other thing. And it didn't talk about any of, like, the human effect of folks losing their jobs or being invested in something and then being disappointed by it. And I feel like the arrogance of those talks was had this other, almost like, shadow of folks who couldn't see failure as learning experiences. They could only see them as the things that were personal failures, not systemic ones.
Got it.
And so Reframing Failure asks every student to write a resume of their failures, but failures in quotes. It's like, if you're actually making a resume of it, it's not what schools did you get your degree from. It's what schools did you start and stop out, and why and how. If it's instead of special qualifications, on a resume. It might be things you're not really good at, but you kind of enjoy. It's like, how do we get to tell the story of stuff that isn't just labeled as traditional successful models
Right.
of like points of someone's life and development?
Right.
The other class that we require is called Learning from Experience. And in some way, it's like a prior learning assessment class. Like, it's helping people to tell the story of learning experiences in jobs and life and community organizing and family raising and caregiving of elders or youngers. But it also connects to what we call the Big Ten. At College Unbound, when we started, we named the 10, other place would say soft skills or habits of mind, or the advocacy, collaboration, creativity, resilience, problem solving, communication. I only got to 6. I must be getting old or tired.
Or it's 5:30.
Yeah.
So,
So there's 10 that I would say every college has. FIU has, URI has, the things that an educated citizen of the world has when they graduate from our institution. And we said we weren't just going to name them. We were going to measure the heck out of them. We did 360 assessments beforehand, after, your first day, and your whatever. And then we said, not only are we going to measure them all the time, we're going to make them graduation requirements. So you had to get to master your proficiency level by the time you graduate. Then we said, not only are they graduation requirements, we have to put our money where our mouth is and put credit to them. And so now 10 out of every student's 120 credits towards their bachelor's degree is through them doing portfolio-based presentations of their development and awareness of their work as an advocate, as a problem solver, as a communicator in the world. And that we don't charge for that. It's embedded into the curriculum. It's a thing you can either do after your first semester or you can work on slowly throughout your college degree. But it's where we say every student has that within them. Even in schools that that lift up and brag about their prior learning assessment program, at most, those campuses have 12% of their students getting credit from prior learning assessment. We have 100% of our students doing it because we build the structures around it, absolutely, in that first semester, but also because we actually care about it and lift it up and say, you have that learning in you,
right.
and we want to make sure it's reflected on
It's
your
sending
transcript.
a message, yeah.
Exactly, right? So those are stories of daily triumphs of, I did this with my kid. Those are stories of bigger accomplishments of I started this nonprofit, or I fought for this bill to pass. Or stories of, in class, this kind of person kept on pissing me off, but here we learned how to work through this in these ways. You're documenting and learning that throughout your experience as a college student at College Unbound, and with that are more and more sure of who you are in the world and how to value those skills. And those are the same skills that employers will say you're supposed to have when you graduate, that we want to hire for. Those are the same skills that every college will say, but we center it in a different way that has deep honoring.
Well, we just, do a ton of content and assume they'll pick it up along the way, right? I've always been fascinated by that, not in a good way. And I wouldn't say struggle, but I do realize it's a hard sell for people who've been brought up in that world, and it's not even a hard sell in the sense that people resist the argument. I think hard sell in the sense that when you're so entrenched in a system and it's all you know, it's hard to even see what an alternative look like, right? So this is why disruptive models are necessary, because you will, it sounds nice and flowery, but I need to see what it looks like operationalized. Tell me a little bit about faculty in this model.
Sure.
And I'm saying this as somebody who does a lot of faculty development.
Yeah.
And my approach is less about, what are your learning outcomes? I mean, and I'm not saying that doesn't matter, it does. But it's more about what spirit, what energy, what empathy, what aspect of yourself and your soul are you bringing to this experience? And what have you done to prepare yourself to be in commune with your students, right? And I work really hard on my language. I kid you not, because I know what I'm dealing with. I don't want to like critique or infantilize faculty here, but I understand being one myself and having gone through several years of STEM grad school. So don't let us get started on that. How provocative even this kind of language can sound, right? And it's almost as though I feel the need to really slowly on ramp people in I'm not even talking about just caring about students or just, doing group work or increasing belonging. I'm talking about a whole different way of viewing what it means to be in commune with students. And I imagine that you might have a similar challenge. Maybe I shouldn't call it a challenge, but something you had to think about in terms of who's going to, lay this vision out in the classes.
Yeah. I'm okay calling it a challenge. It's
Okay.
for sure a challenge.
All right. Yeah.
And I also am aware, like, I'm building a college right now that does not have full-time faculty.
Mm-hmm.
And there's ways that is a model that that leans on what others would call contingent faculty or adjunct, and that in a lot of places leans on underpaying faculty,
Right.
holding multiple jobs within multiple institutions. And I want to create a model for part-time faculty that centers equity.
Right.
And we're not there yet, and I want to build that. That needs to embed within it deep professional development and deep care and the same values that we have to students of tell us about the learning that you did in the world and how can we support you doing that work that you want to care about, that you do care about. I want to do that same work with faculty. I want College Unbound to be the space and the community for folks to enact that work. And I think breaking down a hierarchy between students and faculty allows for a faculty member for this to be a space of peer learning. That I think there can be different collaborative problem solving that can feel like a very different kind of higher ed to teach in and work in.
Right.
That being said, as like a preface, I want to think about 4 different types of faculty within College Unbound. One would be that cohort experience I talked about, the World and Workplace Lab, as what we call lab faculty, who work with a cohort of students in a way where they are co-designing that seminar and that syllabus, because every student has projects that they're bringing to it, and faculty is co-designing that space to help the students enact their projects and to learn from one another. That lab faculty role is deeply emotional because you're meeting weekly with each student. You are designing that seminar space, but you're getting to know each student and their lives, and you're there as an advocate for them to try and do that work. And you're there as an advocate for them within the institution so that they can learn the things they need to learn through College Unbound to do that work you're trying to support. Those lab faculty come from folks in the sometimes who are social work, sometimes folks from education, sometimes folks from other institutions, sometimes folks from student services at URI or however. And it's a space that I think is deeply rewarding for a faculty member that can come into it. As a partner with that lab faculty, we have a position that alumni fill called cohort mentors, where they are asked to be sort of like guards of the mission and vision of the school to make sure that the cohort is maintains fidelity to the college, recognizing that sometimes those cohorts have brand new faculty and brand new students. And so we want to make sure there's also somewhere that the students and the faculty can turn to of like, oh, this is a funky program. Are we doing this right? So that you don't revert to the ways of teaching at instead of learning with.
Yeah.
And so you have the cohort
How the
mentor.
story is passed.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Right, yeah.
So you have the cohort mentor, you have the lab faculty. Those online 8-week instructional classes have what we call instructional faculty that most resemble faculty in other institutions as well. I would say it's sort of like a third split between faculty from other institutions who are teaching traditionally aged students that seek us out because they're looking to teach in different ways or teach an adult learner student population. We have faculty who are new degree holders that are just stepping into higher education, teaching and learning, and want to define their relationship to higher education differently. So they're maybe not looking for a traditional job, a traditional tenure track job, but want to be teaching higher ed.
Right.
And so there's folks who are just finished their degree and stepping into that.
Right.
And then there's folks who are really like mid-career scholars, actors, workers in the world in fields that maybe don't formally have teaching and learning embedded into them, but absolutely informally all the time are doing teaching and learning work. And so are managers in their workplace that then come to College Unbound to teach organizational leadership and change work across the curriculum. And so we support a community of faculty members who teach in those 8-week classes over the course of the year. There's not folks teaching more than 5 classes, so like we have 5 8-week chunks. But we do have mentor faculty and core faculty that have multi-year contracts through the institution. So they have a level of connection to the institution over time, and they help to support new faculty stepping into that.
Okay.
And then we have assessment faculty, of folks who are coming in to support the assessment of those Big 10 portfolios I talked to you about. And we have faculty that have multiple positions across all of those. We're trying to step better into and more intentionally is making sure that our alumni, or our cohort mentors, have the ability and the training and the support to step into being lab faculty and instructional faculty and assessment faculty.
Okay.
We do that well institutionally. A third of our full-time staff at the college are alumni of the college. So they're folks who finished College Unbound as the funky school critiquing higher ed as it is. They were folks that didn't feel like they could finish a degree at a traditional institution, then coming to CU and seeing higher ed as the place that they wanted to base their career. I want to do that on faculty levels too.
Right. So the name is intuitive. But is there more to how you came up with the name?
The Unbound part?
I guess the college is pretty obvious.
So I'll say 2 things about having that name, and then we can circle back. The one is we haven't yet talked about our student body in depth enough, but 50% of our student body identifies being justice impacted, and use that term as a way to frame they either have a relationship to incarceration personally or have family or friends that have a relationship to the carceral system because of that. And so we can't be a school called College Unbound without teaching within and challenging carceral spaces. And so to think about the tension of liberatory learning inside classrooms and prisons, and also supporting folks.
So you lean
navigating.
pretty deeply into that.
Yeah, not because that is, now there's Pell Grants and that's where we need to go. And not because, that's a market share. It's because that's our student body always.
Right.
That's our those are our students. And so there's no line in the sand of this is where learning happens and this is not where it happens. It's making sure we are there to have cohorts and classes and space of collaborative learning where folks already are. And so that also means in those spaces.
Yeah.
And I'll also say, certainly we have a funky name. And every couple
I don't know
years,
if I would say funky, but
okay. Well, we have a name that reminds folks of an Outward Bound program or a college access program or things like that. So
actually, what it reminded me of, I'll say when I hear the name, and just because maybe I know about the school, I lived in Providence for several years. I've read about it. Some of your board members are people I know, and how you describe everything, the ethos of the school is, sounds like sort of the unbundling of higher ed and rebuilding and reframing and reconstructing it to kind of more directly address the things we need to address, right? That's what I take from the Unbound. I do remember, I can't remember the program I was watching, but somewhere I was in San Francisco, there was a startup that had, I forgot the name of it, but the idea was they were going to take the sort of discretize the different services colleges typically offer, and give students opportunity to access those on their own space or whatever. Like, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe I'm just not remembering the program very well. But it was a very different. It's different to what you're describing. That was more. It was keeping a lot of what we know college to be,
Yeah.
but just maybe removing the frat parties, right? Right, and the varsity teams and stuff like that. So that was my only reference. But because I know
Yeah.
I feel like I know a bit more what it means in the context you mean it in.
Yeah, the is really important.
Okay.
There's always a higher ed as it could be, should be, that we want to step into.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a higher ed that has been that we want to critique by creating new models of being.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it's not unbundling. I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
what we're
right,
always
right,
talking
yeah.
about with like Minerva or whoever.
Yeah, I think it was them. Yeah.
But the unboundedness is meaning there's a way that it is done and a way that can be more expansive and
Right.
imaginative and capacious.
Okay.
And that's what we want to step into.
Okay.
It's the
I think it was good to hear that.
it's
said.
like it's College Unbound, but it's about the aspirational vision of higher education.
Right.
And we should always have that aspiration.
Right.
We should always be improvisational.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's a way that when we became a college, we became an institution, we could have, and lots of places do, institutionalize. We did this thing. We got accredited. Let's be this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure we are always in this practice of becoming more us in our values.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, I think you get locked into
Mm-hmm.
a way of being that as the world changes, you
Right.
don't change.
Right. Michelle Obama would be proud.
That's right.
Well, tell me a little bit about your student population. So you mentioned that one statistic, and I know it started off, as an LLC almost with traditionally aged, and then you said you had adult learners reach out. Tell me about your population now, what it looks like, what you
Yeah.
love about them, what you know about them.
Our student body averages at 38, 39 years old.
Okay.
70-something% women. 80-something% parenting students.
Mm-hmm.
And through a curriculum and a relationship to the college, 90-something% of them say their path to a degree helps them do the work that they're trying to do in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It helps them move up, get a $15,000 pay bump because they get the degree and they step into this new work.
Mm-hmm.
As we grow the school, it's really trying to do it through a community organizing and partnership model.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly in Rhode Island, where we have about close to 2/3 of our students, it's as folks graduate, it's their family and friends that are coming to the school.
Right. Right.
In new cities that we're stepping into, in Philadelphia and Chicago, Seattle, Greenville, it's really making sure we have deep partnerships with workplaces and with sectors, so that we're building cohorts that are embedded into public school districts, into health clinics, into unions, into nonprofits that are supporting employees of those places together move into a bachelor's degree, and through doing that,
Right.
build the capacity of their workplace and sector. And so if you think about in Philadelphia, we have 10, soon to be 15 cohorts of teacher assistants in the public school district. As they get bachelor's degrees, they step into being classroom-based teachers.
Right.
There's real pathways to systems change in that, and that we want to make sure that our college keeps on advancing that.
Yeah. So I want to bring this back to you for a second, because one of the things one trap I never really want to fall into is when I'm having conversations like these. Sometimes, or maybe I should say when I listen to conversations like these, sometimes guests or I hear people talk about really cool projects, and to the audience it just sounds like it just came to be. But actually, what I'm hearing based on what you shared of your own story is what has come to be is intricately connected to your own personal journey. And, you talk about the oral history project and all of that work. And I sort of wonder, was there a time when you had envisioned yourself to be not doing what you're doing now? And this is not to dismiss what you're doing now, but was there a time when you say, oh, in 10 years I'll be a jazz musician or a historian or maybe a more traditional thing? But based on your telling of the last, 35, 40 minutes, it sounds like you also were in a permanent state of improvisation.
Yep. Yeah.
And if I'm right about that, I don't get the impression that necessarily started with doing oral history of jazz or stagehand with school theater. So I'm wondering, like, tell me about the origins of that. I mean, I know the incident with your grandfather was deeply impactful, but there seemed to be some ethic that has come to be in you that has driven this project and a lot of what you've done. Could you talk about that a little bit? He's looking up in the sky in case my audience wants.
When I was 5, I wanted to be a paleontologist. I remember that. I mean, in some way, there's like a deep privilege to being raised with that ethic of you can be whatever you want to be and step in, and you have the time to be able to experiment in those ways.
Yeah.
So I do not take that for granted.
Right.
I did always feel a deep urgency, though. I mean, there's a meanderingness that I think led to what I'm doing.
Where are you from again?
Los Angeles.
Okay, yeah, you did say that. Yeah.
But I always felt there was an urgency to work. And when I was spending time with jazz musicians, I mean, I had to learn the harmonica well enough that they had a reason to want to talk to me, or they understood that I had a reason to talk to them. I couldn't just be an outsider weirdo wanting to talk to them. I had to be a musician.
What C sharp?
Yeah. So I had to be good enough at the harmonica to like be in that world.
Right.
And, there's that Ellison quote of like, this music demanded action. Those stories and that music certainly demanded action. It was following that to the next thing. I didn't go to grad school thinking I would be in higher ed. I went to grad school because I knew I needed help figuring out how to support the telling and the lifting up of those stories.
Right.
But that was that was my entry point into the landscape of higher ed.
Right.
And then that became my organizing space.
Right.
And so College of Unbound became the outgrowth of that.
Right.
I would say also, I don't mean to deflect your question about me into then being about the college and students, but like there's a danger in College Unbound of a college built around each individual student. You can do the project you want to do, of it being social entrepreneurship, social enterprise. Everyone can do their own thing. There's something deeply important in the college of it being grounded in community and collective and shared visioning. And so this wasn't my project. This was work that emerged out of being deeply in relationship with others over many years.
Right.
And at College of Unbound, for any student, it's making sure that we are building the type of learning environment where even though we talk about individualized curriculum to navigate your bachelor's pathway, it's always in deep community with who you are, where you come from, where we collectively need to go as a world, as communities, and organization for there to be more justice in it. And when we talk about being more and more of a college, we've got accredited. Accreditation has standards. You have the standards of accreditation. You need to show that to your peer institutions you're doing the things that qualify you to be an institution. There's other peers beyond other higher ed institutions that I want to think about as our institutional peers. And I want to co-develop those standards of being a institutional citizen of the world, of what it means to support there being more justice in the world and more collaboration in the world, and more advocacy and care and collective visioning. And really being in deep conversation with you, I want to make sure that you're a part of that work, that we're thinking about that together, and that we're always building structures like faculty development ones, like curricular ones, that that ground that in deep relational work, in active listening, and in improvisation.
Yeah. See, I'll tell you one thing I struggle with. And you touched on it. You acknowledge your privilege, and I'll acknowledge mine as well. I mean, some areas, not in some areas, I get it. But in the same way you talked about going to grad school, not necessarily with the aim of being a professor. I went to grad school, at least the initial goal, right, was to get involved in some way in environmental conservation work. And I think this mentality I have comes from my deceased dad, in that I have kind of a visceral reaction to feeling like I'm being controlled, and not necessarily by a person per se, but by a system that's telling you you must do this, and to be valuable to us you must behave like this and take this class and be that way. And so you're sort of seeing that you're going to grad school and you're seeing all of these things, right? And I chose the path that I chose my path, right? And I had the privilege of running into a classroom that really made me look at myself and what I want to do in this world. But when I speak to people, and I'm sure you have this too, there's a sense in which it has a little bit of a do what you love feel to it, which I worry a little bit feels reckless, like just do what you love and things will work out, which is not what it is, right?
Right.
And I don't, in a society and a culture where the tendency and the temptation is to commodify everything into some capitalist framing, right? It will get you a nice job, a nice salary, I neither want to be dismissive of the need to have a sustainable, financially sustainable life, but also I don't want to be so, enslaved to that, that you're just checking boxes, right? And do you have challenges in having, because that to me is a lot of what you describe about College Unbound, right? 'Cause we're not doing this to get you to be an accountant. Right. We're doing this for the values of the world, of society, of the community.
Well, there was a crossroads 15 years ago where it could have been, we really care about bringing people together to learn together. Why do we need to get accredited and be a college to do that? And there's deep, amazing models that I do follow and feel like are models for CU, but could have been models for not being an accredited college, of Highlander Institute, Freedom Schools, we became an accredited college because our student body needed us to be an accredited college, because the value of the degree helps them be an accountant if they need to be if they want to be an accountant, if it helps them move in the world with a different freedom and flexibility. And the bet we were making is that we could do the things that are deeply important of how to learn together, even within the confines of being an accredited college. And I think we do it pretty well.
Okay.
It's not I'd push against the, do what you love, it'll work out. Because our students come to us with also deep hurt of past institutions of higher ed, but also of other systems that have affected them.
Right.
And through a Bachelor's of Arts degree in organizational leadership and change, they are doing work that challenges those systems. That's not casual, and that's... I can find it romantic when I'm telling the story about it, but it's not just romantic work. It's deeply actionable, has deep impact, and I think needed a degree behind it to have that level of impact. Right.
I want to close with one more question, and I save this for last on purpose, because even before I had asked you to send me things, additional things about College Unbound, I had known about College Unbound, and I had come across that diversity in democracy article some time ago. And maybe selfishly, as somebody who connects stories, my life, my journey, and how it's kind of impacted my view of the world in ways I didn't know then, but know now. I was moved by your telling of the story of your grandmother, talking to you and, checking in about, am I boring you? Am I, um, and if you don't mind kind of retelling that interaction and how it's informed a little bit of your vision of College Unbound.
Sure. I talked about my grandfather, my mom's dad. You're mentioning a story of my my grandmother, my nanny, my mom's mom, who she was 92 years old when I did probably a dozen hours of oral histories with her. This was before I left in her Cadillac to start to interview jazz
Did she
musicians.
know who you left in her
And
he never answered the question. Go on.
no, it was she very graciously gave me her Cadillac, and it was the right time for her not to be driving a car anymore. So this was the sweet gesture. And over those dozen hours of interviewing, she talked about everything across the 9 decades of her life. And I remember in the closing minutes, it wasn't just the closing minutes, it was really the closing minutes of every hour. She would just start to laugh, are we done already? Do we have to keep going? You must have everything you need. We're over it. And she would just kind of start to giggle at herself. And at the last hour, she was just laughing uncontrollably of you can't ask me any more questions. This has got to be the fullest you need. There's no more to tell. What are you talking about? I'm out of stories. And there's something I think I learned about listening, about patience, about generosity, certainly from the way she tells stories. And if I had, in the first hour when she said I got no more stories, what are you talking about? If I had tapped out, then I would have missed a whole bunch of what I learned about who I am and who our family was. And so there's something about supporting folks to be really aware of their brilliance, of their love, of their stories, that is clear when you hear the dozen hours from my nanny, but it's also an ethic I think of that's baked into College Unbound. Folks entering their first semester a lot of times saying I just need the down and dirtiest, cheapest, quickest, fastest way to a bachelor's degree.
Right.
And I get that. I want it to be cheap and down and dirty and fast for sure. And I think it can also be transformative.
Right.
And it can be transformative when you start by saying, tell me about yourself. What do you care about? What drives you? And out of those questions, you can build a whole pathway, curriculum, and way of learning together that I think can have deep impact for each of us.
Do you still play the harmonica?
I no longer carry one around with me, but I still dream of going back to playing it.
Okay.
Yeah. So
That's like me on piano, but oh boy, I'm amazed at how fast one can get rusty.
Well, next podcast we'll do a duet. You and me.
No promises. Hey, Adam, thanks for spending the hours with me, man. That's great.
This was such a joy, and I'm glad to call you a friend and a partner in the world.
We'll continue to do that.
Thanks.
Take care. Knowledge Unbound is brought to you by the Rios Institute for a racially just, inclusive, open STEM education. We are generously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. I want to thank, as always, my longtime producer, Mr. Sega Vamasai. I want to thank you to the listeners for listening. I encourage you to subscribe. That way you get updates on every new episode. I want to thank President Adam Bush for making the time to spend some time with us and share his stories with us. And I want to confess to you that in talking to him, and as a lover of jazz myself, not an expert, just a lover, he really provided maybe a new way of thinking about improvisation and perhaps what it means to be in a space where You are always looking to create, you're always looking to incubate, and that means you are always needing to scan and be aware of problems and challenges that need fixing. And it feels like, and I hope he's okay with this summary, but it feels like this is exactly how he set up College Unbound to help society and to make a change, to be a difference. So I hope in your own way, your own lives, your own long, fruitful career, my listeners, that you find ways to make and be a change. We'll see you next week. Be excellent to each other.
You weren't just learning improvisation to be a musician. You were learning improvisation as a way of being in the world, and that is political work. And I began to see and understand improvisation not just as a research subject, but the more and more I got involved in higher education, it became the way I taught and designed classes in deep co-creation and collaboration with students.
Okay.
And then as I got more and more involved in higher ed, it became the institutional ethic I was after.